Chapter 13 in Robin Hood. Will Stutely falls into a trap. A trap. Now it happened on the night that Robin Hood, Little John, and Much made their famous escape over the walls of Nottingham, that they were seen. A neighbor of Lob the cobbler had been aroused by the alarm bell, and the shouting had run out to see what was the cause of the uproar. He was going back into his house when he heard the stealthy movements on the roof of Lob's shop. He was a sly, creeping sort of fellow, this neighbor, whose name was Higg. So he hid himself and watched the cobbler's house. Soon he became certain that 3 men had been let down over the wall, and he wondered what it meant. The next day he felt quite certain who the men were when he heard the sheriff's man proclaim that a great reward would be given for the capture of Robin Hood and the 2 men who had pretended to be messengers from the king. Higg went at once to the sheriff and told his story. At first the sheriff had it in his mind to seize Lob, but just as he was about to give the order, he paused. "Nay," said the sheriff, to seize a wretched cobbler is scarcely worth the trouble. He shall be my decoy bird. If the outlaws make such use of him, surely they'll often visit him. So I will have his house watched, and perhaps it will be a trap in which to seize the prize worth taking." So he gave Higg 12 silver pennies on the spot, and promised him 50 more if he would watch his neighbor's house closely. And give the word at once when Lob had visitors who had the air of men from the greenwood. Higg pocketed the silver pennies and went home, and kept a sharp watch on Lob's house. More than a week passed before he came hotfoot to the sheriff's house. "There's a stranger now with Lob," he said. "Not a townsman, but I believe an outlaw." The sheriff sent 3 of his men at once to seize the stranger they would find in the house of Lob the cobbler, and to bring him to the sheriff's hall. Away went the 3 men and burst into the cobbler's house, and found him talking with a tall, strong man. The latter was Will Stutely, and he had actually come on Robin's behalf to see if Lob had escaped all suspicion of being concerned in the flight of Robin and his friends. Now Robin's care for Lob, who had helped him, was the cause of Will's downfall, for no one dreamed that the sly and cunning Higg was watching the house for the sheriff. As it happened, one of the 3 men sent by the sheriff knew Will Stutely well. "Aye, aye, 'tis an outlaw," he cried. "Seize him, comrades. Away with him to the sheriff. Our master will be pleased with this." "May your master the devil." "'Tis one of the chief among the rogues who serve under Robin Hood." Will drew his sword and made a dash at the door. There was a fierce fight, and Stutely cut down 2 of his opponents and burst out into the street. But there he met with fresh enemies, and was overpowered and taken. The sheriff laughed a grim laugh when he knew that one of Robin's men had been seized. "No need to appeal to the king about this one, at any rate," he cried. "This fellow is in my hands entirely, and up he shall swing with the break of day tomorrow. Put him in jail, and let a strong body of archers watch the place until he is safely hanged." When Robin heard this news, he was deeply grieved, and said to his men, "Let us swear that Will Stutely we will rescue, or, if we fall, many a gallant wight we shall slay in revenge." Robin at once gathered his men from every part of the forest, and the outlaws marched away to the rescue of their comrade. Away they marched to Nottingham, and before the break of day, Robin had placed his men in ambush before the walls. To their surprise, the first light of dawn showed them a gallows erected before the gate. The sheriff was so confident that a swift hanging would be carried out with success that he built the gallows in face of the forest in his scorn of the outlaws. He little dreamed of how swift Robin had been to rush to the rescue. "There is a palmer standing under the walls yonder," said Robin Hood to Little John. I'll send a messenger to him to gain the latest tidings." A young man was sent to speak with the palmer, and returned with the news that Will Stutely would soon be brought out to be hung on the gallows tree before the wall. Scarce had the young man returned Then the gates were thrown open widely, and a line of archers and spearmen, bowmen and billmen, came pouring out of the town. Rank after rank they swept forward until the gallows was surrounded by a powerful force of armed men, their spearheads and drawn swords glittering in the rays of the newly risen sun. Almost last of all came Will Stutely, his arms bound and a white cap on his head. This cap the hangman would pull over the prisoner's eyes before the rope was put around his neck. Around Will marched a band of the sheriff's stoutest fellows, and the sheriff rode beside the group which guarded the outlaw. Will looked up at the gallows and gave a grimace of disgust, then spoke up gallantly to the sheriff. Now, seeing that I must die, grant me, I pray you, one boon. No man of our noble band hath yet been hanged. Therefore give me a sword, and let me unbound, that I may fight with thy men until I am killed. But the sheriff would not hear of granting Will Stutely so brave a death. No, indeed, replied the sheriff gruffly. Thou shalt die in the gallows, and thy master too, if ever it lie in my power. Will Stutely laughed, the sheriff to scorn, on hearing this craven reply. But the sheriff cared nothing for that, and only wished to see the outlaw hanging by the neck. Now near the gallows there was a little thicket of hazels, and just as the rope was about to be placed around Will Stutely's neck, a tall man sprang from the thicket and burst through the guards with the utmost coolness. What, Will? He said. And are you going to take leave of the world without bidding goodbye to all your friends? Nay, that is unkind of you. Will looked up with a gasp of delight. He could not fail to know that voice, and to recognize the huge form. It was Little John who stood before him. In the surprise and confusion following the moment in which the giant burst through the ring of guards, Little John was quick to act. He cut Will's bonds and snatched a sword from the hands of one of the sheriff's men, and gave it to his friends. Now, Will, guard thy head. And he cried, and the two outlaws stood back to back and defied the whole throng to seize them. All this had passed so quickly that the sheriff sat on his horse, gasping in silent wonder, and scarce able to find his voice. Then voice and rage burst from him together. "'Tis he, 'tis he!" yelled the sheriff. "Yonder great rogue is the fellow who hath cozened the king and me. 'Tis the false messenger. Seize him on your lives. But nay, slay him, that is the surer way." It was all very well for the sheriff to call upon the guard to slay Little John, but to do it was another matter. For the giant stood there, his buckler in one arm, his huge gleaming sword waving about his head, his ruddy face lit with the joy of battle, and ready to crush to the earth any who should dare venture within reach of that mighty broadsword. Then arose a still wilder shout of surprise and a louder cry of dread, for a long, clear bugle note rang out, and a band of archers sprang from the cover of the forest and rushed upon the force which the sheriff had gathered. Robin Hood's men, shouted the foresters. "Bows and bills! Comrades, bows and bills! Have at them! A hood to the rescue!" roared the outlaws, and charged home with Robin at their head. The onset of the outlaws was so fierce and unexpected that the sheriff and his men were borne back into the very gates of the town. This advantage lay to the credit of the brave and wily Little John. He had made his venture alone into the midst of the enemy in order to draw their attention and give his comrades a chance of taking them unawares. And he had succeeded nobly. In the uproar of the combat, he cut his way easily through the ranks of the enemy and rejoined his friends with Will Stutely at his side. Robin Hood had his eyes everywhere at once. No sooner did he see that the prisoner and Little John were safe than he sounded the order for retreat to the forest. He had gained his end, and there was no further need for bloodshed. Besides, the sheriff's men were beginning to rally and recover from the surprise, and they formed a powerful and well-armed force, outnumbering the outlaws by at least 3-1. So Robin, like a prudent leader, thought it was wise to draw back in time. The outlaws obeyed at once and began to retreat, shooting steadily as they went, and holding back their foes with shower after shower of keen shafts. But there were brave fellows, too, among the sheriff's force, and they burst after the outlaws in hot pursuit. On the edge of the forest a sad mischance befell, for down went Little John on his face with an arrow through his knee. Master, cried Little John, I can neither fight nor fly. Take, I pray thee, thy good broadsword, and smite off my head, that I might not fall alive into the hands of the sheriff. But who will triumph over me? By the rood, Little John, but I will not, cried Robin Hood. I would not lose thee for all the gold in merry England. And he turned to hold back the foremost of his pursuers, while Little John was carried off. This was done by Much, who swung the huge fellow on his shoulders and bore him away, heavy as he was, with ease. So the running fight and retreat went on, ever growing worse for the outlaws, for 7 men were wounded sorely, and not one was left to the tender mercies of the sheriff. Many fell on the other side, but these did not hinder the pursuit, which pressed hotter and hotter on the 4 outlaws. Robin Hood was a host in himself that day. Every time his bow twanged, one of the sheriff's men reeled to the earth, and so far was the range of his whistling shafts that he held them at bay long after they would have closed on poor bondsmen. Nobly did his men second him. Will Scarlet, Stutely, Hal, and Hob, and the rest fought beside him, and the iron sheet of their keen shafts held back the fierce pursuers, while others toiled ahead with the heavy load of wounded men. And so the tide of retreat and battle surged along a forest road and into a wide clearing where a fair castle, raising its grey walls above a deep moat. At sight of the combat, the warder blew his horn, and all aroused the inmates of the castle. Among the first to reach the walls was the knight, who was the lord of the castle. He cast a single glance at the retreating men, and then rushed to the drawbridge, crossed it, and hurried toward them. In, he shouted. Carry your wounded in, and retire thither, every man. My house is thine. It was Sir Richard of the Lea, and not forgetful of benefits received, and never was invitation more welcome. In trooped the outlaws to the shelter of the strong stone walls, and the sheriff and his men dashed up to hear the portcullis clang down, and the drawbridge go creaking up, and to find themselves on the wrong side of the deep dark moat. The proud and disappointed sheriff cried out, Thou traitor knight, thou art succouring the enemy of the king, thou art breaking the law. Then Sir Richard looked over the wall and replied, Sir, I will avow the deed that I have done, even to the loss of my lands. Go now to the king, and learn what is his will in the matter. Till then Robin and his men are safe with me. So the sheriff went to London and told the tale to the king. By my faith, as the crowned king and belted knight, said Sir Richard Plantagenet, but these fellows hold together truly and staunchly. The more I hear of them, the greater grows my wish to see them. Go back, sheriff, stir no more in this matter at present. I myself will come to Nottingham shortly and look into these things myself. Now the sheriff had been hoping to get orders from the king to raise the whole country on Sir Richard's castle, and so he was greatly disappointed. Still, there was nothing for him to do but go home in dudgeon and wait for the king, while Sir Richard feasted Robin and his men to the full, and his lady nursed Little John and the wounded men back to health and strength. Got 2 chapters left. King Richard comes to Sherwood, and then Robin his last arrow. And then in the appendix it has, I think it has some of those, the ballads of Robin Hood. Bold Robin Hood, he did the right, and took the damsel from the doting knight. Came, it's all these things. Thank you.